Welcome to the Friends of Work podcast, the podcast about mastering emotional intelligence at work.
I think it's happening around the country. You're seeing people moving into different cities that, don't look like the city that was there 10 years ago. And people are having a really hard time with that. It's a culture shock, and they don't understand how to work with people from other countries. And so my advice, though, to, anybody that is hoping to actually make a positive impact is to first off be welcoming. I mean, for people that are coming from another country, traditions are important. Culture is important, and know that they have left behind something more than likely not because they wanted to, because they had to. And so for so many people, they're going through a tremendous amount of stress, pressure. And so anything that you can do to be welcoming to them in that environment is important. So I think that's the first thing. The second is just get to learn and know people. I mean, that's the most important thing.
Welcome to the Friends at Work podcast. My name is Ade Toye, and I'm the host of this podcast. That was Eric Rasch, the operations manager of the Silver Spring Civic Building, downtown Silver Spring, Maryland. Silver Spring shares a border with Washington, D.C., and is one of the 10 most diverse cities in the United States. Eric, who's originally from Missouri, shares some great insights into interacting with immigrants and lessons from his 2 decades experience in community service. Just before I play you the rest of our conversation, here's a quick announcement.
In the coming weeks, the Friends of Work podcast with Aditoye will be bringing you even more exciting guests and events. To support this podcast and to learn more about our future plans, please go to patreon.com/friendsatwork. That is patreon.com/friendsatwork. Thank you.
My name's Eric Rasch, and I'm the operations manager for the Silver Spring Civic Building at Veterans Plaza. It's considered the region's premier gathering place for government, culture, commerce, and community. And I love it, and I thank you for welcoming me down here to the living room today.
How does one even get into this kind of business, managing a space like that? Because, I think about it and I'm like, if I wanted to get your type of job, how do I prepare myself to get that kind of thing?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you have asked that, because recently I was at a meeting and someone asked me the same question. She said she had a son that was getting ready to go to college. He wasn't sure what he wanted to do, but she saw me and she said, you remind me of my son. I would love to tell him how you got there. And so it's kind of neat sometimes when you think about it, how life plays out. And so for me, it started in Kansas City, Missouri, where I'm from. And I was one day working at an ice skating rink in the winter time, and it was a seasonal position. And I would go up to this neighborhood recreation center and play basketball with a lot of the guys. And one of the guys that led the facility, he comes up to me and he says, "Hey, you work really well with these kids. Would you like a job?" Well, because it was my summer, or the winter was ending, and I was probably in search of a job and it seemed pretty cool, he said, "Yeah, go ahead and take the job." And I did, and it was fantastic. It was at Troost Midtown Community Center, and it was my first introduction into public service. It was a nonprofit facility, and we had a soup kitchen. We offered after-school programs, and it was really a lot of fun. And I was a young guy at that time, so I really had some fantastic mentors to look up to. But that got me the start to this trajectory of public service.
So you're saying that to get along this lines, start serving wherever you are. That's what I kind of hearing from you.
Yeah. And that's it. I mean, I think for a lot of people, and so I guess to kind of go a little bit further into it, that led to a Parks and Recreation opportunity. So I did the nonprofit in the neighborhood for a while, and it was in a rough neighborhood, and that's where I kind of grew up. And so the community really needed a safe place to go, and I felt that I was going to help create that space along with others. And from there, I went to the Kansas City, Missouri Parks and Recreation, which was a huge opportunity because it's a big city. and they had recreation facilities and places for people to go all around the city. And so it also kind of started with a part-time position at the Parks and Recreation Department for Kansas City, Missouri. And my boss at the time called me, I remember this really clearly, and he says, "We would like to offer you a full-time position with the department." I said, "Well, okay, well, what's that entail?" He says, "The same stuff you're doing, but you'll get benefits and paid time off." I said, "Well, that sounds pretty good." And he said a little bit more money. So anyways, that was how I got started. I had a passion for it. I loved it. And so I was in Parks and Recreation, just doing work, running summer camps, working with senior citizens, working with adult programs, just you name it, I was up for it. And I said yes to everything. And so there was a lot of opportunities because, some people don't say yes to everything. And so when you do say yes to everything, you're kind of starting to be known as this person would do it. And I put a lot of passion into it. So, that's kind of how I got started. I did that for 10 years in Kansas City, Missouri Parks and Rec, and had all kinds of opportunities, mentors that really helped out. There were challenges. I went to different facilities where they were in really rough neighborhoods sometimes, or they were kind of forgotten communities, and people, just weren't giving them much hope. And so, it was a great opportunity for me to say, well, I think we can do something here. And people were ready for it. And so I think it's just a public service type of thing. And eventually then you start saying, well, because I love this so much, maybe it's going to be my profession.
I heard a lot of things in what you said, and I really appreciate it. I'm hearing passion. I'm hearing a lot of hard work. I'm hearing going to places where others wouldn't necessarily go and doing things other people wouldn't necessarily do, and also finding mentors who will get you to where you need to go. All right. And I noticed this from life experience generally, that the more you do something, the more you work in a field, the more you realize the opportunities that lie there, and possibly find a way to even do more because you are focused on that thing. So another thing I hear is focus within the service. Am I hearing you right with all of these things?
Oh, definitely. Focus is important because over the course of my career, I've had different focal points. It may be just at one point to make a soccer league that has, 2 teams in it, turn it into a soccer league with 30 teams. And that's a big focus where I remember in Tacoma Park when I first got there, we had in Tacoma Park, Maryland, we had a t-ball league, and there was 12 kids in the program, and I said, that's not enough to play each other. There's really not enough. And so that was an easy focus to say we got to have enough kids in this program to have them play each other, have games, see different teams each week. They're not playing the exact same team every week. And so you take sometimes the obvious and you say, all right, how are we going to make this better? How are we going to do things that we know are going to get people excited? So by the end of my time there, we had 120 kids in the program, and we cut off registration every year because we simply had limited parks, and we also were up against the weather because the later in the day it got really hot, and the kids couldn't take it. So with that program, though, 120 kids maxed out, and year after year, people were really looking forward to it. But those are the type of things with the focus. You just find something that you really want to improve and go ahead and make that happen.
Nice. From what you talked about, you worked in very diverse places, from Missouri to Maryland. I've been to Missouri. It can be more different from Maryland, in my opinion.
There's some differences, for sure. Yeah, there's some differences.
And I'm curious to know, especially for somebody who grew up in the Midwest and who worked there for a long time and who worked in the capacity in which you worked in, what were some of your culture shock moments when you moved here to the East Coast, particularly to Maryland, Tacoma Park, and now Silver Spring?
Oh, boy, that's a good question. And it's a tough one because I wouldn't quite say I had a culture shock moment, because growing up in Kansas City, and a lot of people don't necessarily associate this with Kansas City, but there's a lot of diversity in Kansas City. Not near as much as in Montgomery County, Maryland, or the Washington metropolitan region, but there is a lot of diversity. So a lot of friends I grew up with were from different countries, or their parents were from different countries. When I was younger, I went to a Vietnamese school, which, was also really interesting. So there's a lot of opportunities for me to, be around people that were different, that had different experiences, different cultural backgrounds. My dad used to take me to a lot of cultural festivals when I was a kid, which was really, I think, a great way to learn what people value and what they hold as their traditions. So I wouldn't say necessarily that there was a huge, aha moment when I moved here, but there's definitely like a huge amount that I've learned since moving here, and I have a deeper understanding of people and cultures, and what I keep on trying to do is learn more about it every day I can. And I think when you also have that, when you're showing that you are interested in it, people are so willing to share it with you. And so I've found that that's one of the biggest things. I can't thank so many people for inviting me to, their picnic or their celebration or their, gathering, simply to say, hey, we want you here and we want to share this with you. And and then I get to tell people about it, and it's a lot of fun.
Nice. 4 of the most diverse cities in America, ahead of New York City, are in Montgomery County. And I've been checking the stats for the last 3 years, and it's amazing. Well, this year only 3. Well, from the last stat I checked, there were only 3 cities that were 3 of the 10. And I appreciate that you grew up in a city that was diverse, and so there wasn't like huge shock moments. But I want to mix this question in two. One is, even if you didn't have shock moments, I'll give you my experience. I had, moving here from Nigeria, I had culture shock moments, even though I knew intellectually and a little bit socially as much as you could about America, and I'd visited before I moved. So there were culture shock moments, but there were also culture aftershock moments for me, where it was like I thought I'd figured some things out, and then something happens, and I'm like, no, I didn't. I don't think I really figured that out, or it still shocks me, but it's along the same lines of where I thought I had figured things out. So if you've had moments like that, it would be great to talk about, but I want to tie this into it and say, in living in this community, in this really diverse community that we find ourselves, what has been some of the challenges with managing people with so many varied worldviews?
Oh, all right. That's a good question. And I think for me, this is what I've found to be challenging, is sometimes people will look at me and they draw a conclusion before they meet me. And you may be able to relate to that. That's what it sounds like too. And so that is one of the biggest challenges for me, is people that haven't met me or haven't had a chance to talk with me would draw a conclusion and think that, I'm against them right off the bat, or that I'm going to find something wrong with their cultures and their traditions. So I remembered when I first took a job with the Silver Spring Civic Building in Montgomery County, I had one person that kind of really felt like I was going to be a threat to them and doing something. I hadn't actually had a chance to even sit down and talk with them, but they felt that way. And so, it was a little tough, because I have pretty thick skin, but of course everybody wants to feel accepted, and you feel like you want to at least have the opportunity to, feel like this person had a chance at least to meet me, and then they drew their own opinion and conclusion. And I just didn't really get that. Now, over the course of time, I've changed their opinion of me, which is good. But it took me aback a little bit, just because, I felt like, what did I do to deserve this? And, I think it sometimes happens quite often for people, that they feel that they've been, excluded or looked upon. And, sometimes that's not actually a bad thing for me to experience myself, because it's just a reminder that everybody else goes through this too. And so then it reminds you that, not everything is going to go your way. And you want to make sure that when you're working with people that you're not doing that to them. So it helps out sometimes when you get that. It's like a blessing in disguise.
Yeah, and I appreciate that level of self-awareness, because a lot of people, I feel, do not do too much introspection. As I've talked with people, and I know I'm generalizing, but I feel like if more people did more introspection about how their actions influence and affect other people, we would have a less threatened or a less aggressive and dangerous world, really. I think about all the protests that are going on in America right now, from the Me Too movement to fear of immigrants, or to even the hatred of immigrants and other, different things that are going on. And I see and hear a lot of lack of self-awareness in those conversations. And I wish there was more, but I wish there was a whole lot more. But saying all of that as a background, and I feel like you're in a much better position to address this issue, frankly, in America, because skin color matters. All right. How would you speak to another community that's not as diverse as Silver Spring or Tacoma Park or Kansas City? Somebody who's a manager in your role in a more homogeneous, mostly white community, how would you advise them to create a more welcoming environment, safe and welcoming environment for people who are not like them?
Well, that's a fantastic question. I think it's happening around the country. You're seeing people moving into different cities that, don't look like the city that was there 10 years ago. And people are having a really hard time with that. It's a culture shock, and they don't understand how to work with people from other countries. And so my advice, though, to anybody that is hoping to actually make a positive impact is to first off be welcoming. I mean, for people that are coming from another country, traditions are important. Culture is important, and know that they have left behind something, more than likely not because they wanted to, because they had to. And so for so many people, they're going through a tremendous amount of stress, pressure, and so anything that you can do to be welcoming to them in that environment is important. So I think that's the first thing. The second is just get to learn and know people. I mean, that's the most important thing. For me, whenever I go to a community, and even in Kansas City, which I spent over 10 years there, I went to a diverse amount of community centers, facilities around the city, that one neighborhood is very different from another. And so when I would do that, I wouldn't try to come there with my own agenda. I wanted to learn the neighborhood. I wanted to learn the people that were in there, find out what mattered to them, why they, either why they weren't going to that facility or why they needed to go. What kind of services did they need? I'll tell you just a quick story about this facility called Southeast Community Center. It was in one of the roughest areas of Kansas City. When I got to the facility, there was a parking lot, and it had glass everywhere. And no one could park in the parking lot. In fact, people parked on grass that was further away from the community center when they did park. And I was kind of shocked. I was like, why do we have glass everywhere? Why is there a parking lot where no one's parking on it? And then I noticed there's basketball courts, or what appeared to be basketball courts, on the same parking lot. They didn't have hoops and they didn't have backboards, but they had the poles. And I said, okay, there used to be a basketball court here. So every day I would go out there with a broom and a dustpan, and I would just simply start sweeping. And everybody at that facility and in the community would say, what's wrong with this guy? Doesn't he know that there's going to be more glass there tomorrow? And I would do it, but people were curious. What's his strategy? I didn't try to do it all at once. It was just a little bit at a day. And so eventually, though, the parking lot was completely clean. And the kids helped. The kids came and they were looking for something to do. I said, yeah, we got another broom and a dustpan. Why don't you grab it? We'll do this together. And it gave them a new ownership of a parking lot that they had kind of said, this thing is not. And what would happen was, the tough part, there would be people that would drink at night and they would throw their bottles. And that's why we would continue to have glass. But I would also talk with them at night, the people that were doing it, and I would say, hey, we're really trying to clean this up. The approach is, we're doing this for the neighborhood so the kids can come out here and play. And so there could be some people that park, and so they won't have to park on the grass anymore. Grass would, grow. again. We could play soccer out there. So I was starting to kind of share the vision with everybody. And I think people wanted to see it. And they didn't mind saying yes and helping out. And eventually, the parking lot was clean. I worked with Sprint, which was they're headquartered in Kansas City, and they had a volunteer day. So I told them all the things that we needed. They got paint. We painted the basketball court. We put new rims up. We got, new nets, all this kind of stuff. And the kids really, really appreciated it and had a great place to play. So it was like an easy way to revitalize that neighborhood. But, I first learned, by talking with people too, what is it that you want? And they wanted a safe place to come. They wanted stuff to do. And so it was kind of, a no-brainer to start looking at what we could do, some low-hanging fruit, and make sure that we could, start doing that together. And that's what we did. So
that's a great example. That's a great story. I see one of the things you did there that was really important is you took the lead. You took a leadership role in that situation and helped people see the vision of what you wanted to do, and eventually got done, and you got the people to come along. For someone in your job or in what you do, I keep hearing, for me, as you're talking, I keep hearing that theme coming across, taking leadership, in whatever capacity. And if it's a lesson that I'm beginning to draw from your story, it's to take leadership, take the lead, and go out there and go into situations that may be uncomfortable. You might find out that there are diamonds in the rough, really, that you can polish off, and everybody can say, "Oh, this is great." I want to ask, for someone who does what you do, how has your personality played into this one, and what are the learnable traits that somebody else who's interested in helping other people, not just say manage a civic center, but who wants to know about serving a community and helping other people, what are some of the learnable traits that someone can take from you and from your experience?
On the personality side, when I got a job interview for the city of Tacoma Park, first it was a phone interview, which I was thrilled about. And then after the phone interview, it went well. They said, "Hey, we're willing to fly you out here for a full-day interview." And so I said, I love doing that, and I went ahead and took it. But I met everybody that day, from the city manager, to different department leaders. And one thing was my direct supervisor, which was the director of the department. She said, "Well, if I'm going to take a risk on you, Eric, to bring you halfway across the country, and I have all these other well-qualified applicants that are from around the area here too, how are you going to get things done? How are you going to make things happen?" And I gave an answer which I think it's only the way that someone trusts you. And I said, "I don't know. I've never had a problem anywhere I go with people trusting me and finding ways to get things done." And it was pretty simple with that. Now, that doesn't really give any specifics as into how I'm going to do it, but I'm a creative person. I find ways to get things done. So I think that being creative is a part of my personality. Also taking risks and going and just saying, what comes from within, which was, I'm not going to have a problem with it. I have confidence in myself that I'll be able to do it. Now, she took a risk and it happened. What I think the second part was, what kind of advice?
Yeah, what are the learnable traits that somebody else who doesn't necessarily have your personality can say, okay, I can learn how to do this, even if I don't naturally have these qualities right now?
Yeah, that's important. I think everybody has to really just be with their authentic self. And I think that's something that folks really need to embrace is, don't try to be like somebody else. If you're trying to be like somebody else, it's going to be really hard, and people may find you to be awkward. There's stuff that you can take from people, though, and that's I think at the heart of your question is, what do you see other people doing that you could learn and do? So, over the course of my career, I'm trying to think of some of my mentors, and what they did really was just inspire me to be better at stuff. So, I remember at that nonprofit job in Kansas City at the Truce Midtown Community Center, sitting in my boss's office, the executive director, and him writing a grant proposal, and me asking about, well, what's this word? I've never heard, what blight means before. He says, well, blight is what we're surrounded by, and so you start learning different things and why you're asking for money or how you're going to accomplish the mission. So I learned from him that you're going to need to be a good writer if you're going to ask for money. And then you also need to be able to execute well, because people are you have reporting. I'm trying to think about, back when we would have, the free and reduced meals for lunches, and you have to make sure that the, temperature of the meals is served at a particular rate. You have to keep track of how many people are, eating each day so that your count can be right. No, you don't want to have too little of food. You don't want to have too much food. So it's kind of the management portion of how you're actually going to get things done. And I think anybody, you could learn it from mentors. You could learn it from on-the-job experience. And I think school is extremely important. School, reading books. I think that those are probably the best way to fast-track that because you'll get insight very quickly by going to school or reading books.
So to summarize, for what I hear from you, you get mentors. In fact, that sticks out to me significantly. Get mentors who are doing what you want to do and learn from them. Go to school. That's great.
There's some people that say school is not good, and I think for some people it might not be. So I see there's both sides, but that's the thing about being your authentic self. You really have to understand if you're somebody that is really an entrepreneur that thinks, I can't wait to do this. I don't want to go to school and learn about it and then come out and read about stuff I could be doing right now. There's certain industries where now is you just have to take advantage of it.
Yeah.
And you have to just jump in. So the school might not be right for that particular industry. But for most, I think school is going to be the best.
Yeah, getting information and learning is extremely important from what I'm hearing. So the other thing you also talked about is reading books, right? Get more information, be your authentic self. And so those are the critical things to learn from. Let me ask one of the last few questions. What would be your advice to someone just starting out? Now that you have a few decades of experience, what would be your advice to your younger self if you were to go along the same path but fast track? What would make you go faster? What would you do better? What would you do differently? What's your advice to your younger self?
In some ways, I wouldn't probably change anything. The reason I say that is because, you can grow the most from struggles. So if I think back to how I could probably circumvent some of those experiences where I reached a certain level or a point, and then I realized, I can't go any further here. But it was really because I needed to learn something to grow, so that was more of the challenge that I had, and for me, I'm from the Show Me State, all right? It's Kansas City, Missouri. Missouri is the Show Me State. Sometimes I have to experience it, and so I could say, just go to school, find a career, get great mentors. But for me, it was really important that I had those challenges. I did have great people around me. That was the thing. It's countless people. I would love to say it was, a handful of people, but it's countless people that really, at a certain point in my career, had such a major impact and influence to be able to have me go in a different direction or to break through what was, holding me back. And so, I think just having a self-awareness is really important for someone if it was a younger self, because for me, that was probably one of my biggest challenges, just not being necessarily self-aware of my shortcomings and my strengths. And when you start looking at it and saying, okay, I'm really strong at this, I'm going to continue to do this, and now I have more confidence that I can do this because, you believe in it and you have that confidence. That's one thing. You need to know where you fit in. If you're weak in some parts, that's where you really need to say, okay, this weakness, if I really want to be dynamic in this particular area, how am I going to do it? And you need to work on those skills. And so those, being self-awareness, that's probably the best thing. I know for a long time I probably wasn't. I was just getting by. And I think that sometimes, you may have that arrogance at a younger self to be able to say, okay, I'm good at this. And, other people say, yeah, he's good, but he's got a lot to learn. And I think that's an important factor, is knowing where you're at, what other people think about you, what they think that you could do, but you're limited because you're doing that. So having that 360 self-awareness of what other people think you can do, but then also knowing yourself, because you have to have confidence in yourself first. Otherwise, people won't really, they won't buy into what you're trying to do.
So I love what you talked about, and one of the things that I rarely hear is people talking about the value in the struggle. And I think it's an amazing thing to be aware that there is value and strength, or there's stuff to learn by overcoming certain challenges. I don't think it's one of those things that you hear from success motivation a lot. It's like, go straight to this. This is what you do. This is what you do. And let me give you an observation. As someone who grew up in a totally different culture than this, and I guess to say in a different time, I do not look it, but I'm in my 4th decade.
Now you look good. Yeah, there we go.
And one of the things that I see with the younger generation and with what the media says is, particularly here now, is you just do it, and do it only if it's pleasurable, only if it works for you. You come up against the hurdle, it's just bypass it. Don't go through the situation. And I feel, and I'm not a psychologist by any long shot, but I feel one of the reasons why a lot of people are depressed, a lot of people, not everybody, but some people are depressed, and some people even, end their lives, is that they've been told that all their lives is going to be easy.
That's so true.
And then life hits them with reality, and what they keep hearing and what they're experiencing are so different that they can't make sense of the two. And so that challenge, and that's why, and I bring this out to show how I really appreciate you talking about the struggles, because everywhere else I feel, or in most of the parts of the world, especially if you grew up in a third world country like I did, I grew up pretty well off in the third world country.
Considering.
All right, but I still learned the value in the fact that you needed to go through stuff. And the fact that it's hard doesn't mean that it's not the right direction.
Well, and that reminds me, when you were talking, that I'm thinking back to 20 years ago, and I'm thinking back to my younger self, and it reminded me, at that time I learned a lesson, which was live like no one today, and you'll live like no one else tomorrow. And that was something that was a motivator back then for me, which said, okay, Eric, you're going to take on this day, and you're starting your day off at 9 a.m. and you're leaving work at 3 a.m. And what does it look like for you when everybody else is going out to the parties and picnics and doing all those different things? Why are you saying yes to this? All right, no one else is doing that, and it would be, maybe you're making overtime money and all that, which is okay, but it was really because they needed somebody to run these programs. I'm thinking back at this program called Night Hoops, which was a major initiative in the city, in Kansas City. There was a lot of crime and violence in the city, and the idea was, let's have basketball all around the city so that a lot of these young guys would have something constructive to do at night, and people that don't play basketball would come and watch it, and it would be in a safe place. And it actually helped a lot. It reduced crime in the city significantly. But that also meant that they needed people to work these events and facilities and manage everything. And so I would say yes to it, and I would work around the clock, sometimes 7 days a week. Saturdays, Sundays, I didn't have a Saturday or Sunday off. So other people were inviting me to barbecues and cookouts and pool parties and all the fun stuff, and I'm missing it, But I knew back then that, one, I loved what I did, so just find joy in what you're doing. Don't always think that you should be doing something else. And that I think sometimes is where a lot of the young people, they see stuff and they're not necessarily focused on what they want long term. It's kind of short term for them. So I think, going back to just advice wise, think where you want to be in 10, 15, 20 years. and putting in the work and why you're doing it, and then find joy in what you're doing at that moment. And that's important.
I see a lot of similarities in our stories, honestly. I mean, I worked around the clock doing all sorts. Like
and it pays off. I mean, you end up feeling good, right?
I'm doing this stuff right now.
Yeah.
And all the back end of what I'm doing, I learned on my own, working for other people, doing, IT stuff and trunking. Well, back in the day when computers when it wasn't Wi-Fi, I would, set up cyber cafes, and I would build the computers from the scratch and wire the whole thing, set up the whole network, and all of this completely self-taught, sometimes working into the night for several days. I've done jobs where I had to be at work for 3 days nonstop. Did not leave.
And for anybody listening to the podcast, now they know how you became successful. I mean, it's hard work. It's hard work.
Put in the work, and like you said, it was passionate. I mean, I had passion in it.
Yeah.
But I put in the work. I still keep putting in the work, because it's what you do, and there are obstacles along the way, but you keep doing it. And if there was one lesson I feel like could teach the younger generation right now, it would be, don't give. It might be difficult sometimes. It's life. It's a sinusoidal wave. It's a sine wave. I keep thinking I'm an engineer by training. So
you do it all. You do it all.
But still, it's a sine wave. Life goes up and down.
Totally. And
be as prepared for the downs when the ups are there. You don't have to be afraid of it. It's just how life is. You can smile in both, whether it's up or down.
That's right.
And keep moving on. And I think we can, help the generation coming behind just to see that more. It will be a blessing, honestly. All right, before I let you go, I need you to talk about the Civic Center and the Civic Building. What's it for, and how do we get to use it?
So the Silver Spring Civic Building is, like I said earlier, the region's premier gathering place for government, culture, commerce, and community. But what that means is that people use it for any and everything almost. We have festivals there every Sunday this summer, which is incredible if you think about it. So in downtown Silver Spring, if you're here on a Sunday, you can come to the Veterans Plaza and you can be in the mix and the fun and have a good time. And so much of it is cultural, which is also, it's fantastic. Remember, I was telling you that I went to cultural festivals as a kid when I grew up. This is where parents should be taking their kids on the weekends to a lot of these cultural festivals. One thing that sometimes does, disappoint me a little bit is not seeing enough diversity at the cultural festivals. I would love to see people from other backgrounds coming and experiencing it and trying it. Now, I do see some, but I always want to see more. I mean, and that's just one thing. But beyond Veterans Plaza, people come there. We have outdoor movie nights. We have concerts. Every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, we have outdoor entertainment right now. There's a farmer's market on Saturdays. It's a lot going on. There's something called street buskers, too, or street performers. It's an extremely popular place in downtown Silver Spring to hear extremely talented people performing music. It's kind of our Montgomery County's Chinatown, if you will. It's an intersection of everything cool right there on the corner. So that's outdoors. We have rallies out there, political rallies. And we just recently had a candlelight vigil for the children separated at the border. So it's a public square. It's a public square, and the people from all around the region come there to, make sure that they share their voices, their concerns, all of that. Now, inside the Civic Building, we have an art gallery called the Betty Mae Kramer Gallery. That space, we just had a new exhibit open up on Friday night, and it's incredible. It's like a interactive art exhibit, and so it's going on through, I think, August, maybe 12th or something like that. But anybody can come down there, check out the art. You use your hands, you use your sense. It's pretty cool, but that's going on, and it's open Monday through Friday, 9 to 6. Inside the Civic Building, we have the Buffalo Soldiers Great Hall, which is a tremendous space for banquets, fundraisers, galas. you name it, weddings, bar mitzvahs, quinceañeras. You can have 300 plus people sitting in there for, your ceremony. And if you take away the tables, you could have 400, 500 people in there dancing with the DJ. It's just fantastic. We have projectors that come out of the ceiling for audio, video. And the best part about it, it's all extremely reasonable. The rate is extremely reasonable. Because of that, it's booked out pretty far in advance. So before January of 2018, every Saturday night in 2018 was already booked.
Wow.
If that gives you, a hint into the popularity. But people book it all the time for different conferences, product launches, you name it. People have events there. And so it's a big event facility. We have public meetings there all the time. I think last night we had is dockless bikes working meeting or something like that. Where the public comes and then they talk about the rollout of the dockless bikes, their concerns, their thoughts about it being a success. Everything is kind of takes place in the Civic Building. Tons of community discussions. Nonprofits use the building all the time. About 80% of the users are nonprofits, which leads me into the Community Access Program. The Community Access Program is a way for nonprofits to use the Civic Building at a reduced cost. So it's already low cost, but this is another way that the county has put in their budget, the county executive, the county council, to say, we love nonprofits in Montgomery County. We see the value that they bring, and we want to make sure everybody has the opportunity to experience these cultural events, these outreach events, these services. And so they put money in the budget so that when the nonprofits apply for this program, a review committee reviews their application and awards them money to help cover their costs to use the building. So that has, really been a catalyst to making sure that the Civic Building is meeting that public kind of, need, which is there's some, extremely visionary leaders in Montgomery County that have had these ideas, and the residents that are very involved too in making these things happen.
So to get to use it, we can go to the website.
Yeah, you can go to the website.
To get information.
The website is an easy way to book the space. If you want to talk with the staff, you can come there as well. I would always suggest coming to the building because then you could actually do a tour. You can meet the staff. You can submit your application right away. But and we also have a virtual tour online as well.
Thank you for listening to this episode. You can support this podcast by going to patreon.com/friendsatwork. That's patreon.com/friendsatwork. You can also reach me by email at myfriendtoye@gmail.com. My Facebook page is Friends at Work Podcast, and my Twitter handle is at Friends at Work US. Join me next time for another episode of Friends at Work Podcast with Ade Toye. Bye for now.